Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa, and we're doing a part two of our very popular Microsoft Copilot session. So, you might have been part of the first session last year when we first introduced Copilot, which is our AI assistant in Microsoft. That was just an introduction of the tool, what it does, and how you might be able to use it. But we got so many questions about using the tool that we decided to do the second part, focused specifically on prompt creation. So hopefully you find some, good ideas and pointers so that you can do your own prompts within Microsoft Copilot. Today we have Josh Gorel, who's our O365 product manager. We also have Rafael Supa, who's the manager of messaging and collaboration services with ITS. He's going to be mostly in the chat, answering any questions you might have. And we definitely want this session to be really engaging and really collaborative. So if you have any questions at any point during the session, or even any use cases that your own department or you are doing with Copilot, please let us know. You can type in the chat at any point that you'd like. I'm also going to throw up a link in just a bit. It's a very short survey where you can, if you're a little shy and you want to remain anonymous, you can definitely type some information in there about how you're using Copilot. We do expect quite a lot of people to join, so I do have everyone on mute. But if you'd like to come off the mic, you don't want to just put your question in the chat, you are free to raise your hand in Zoom, and I will pull you off the mic at a good time where I'm not going to interrupt the flow of the demonstration. I'm also recording today's session, so later on, you'll get a follow-up email from me with a link to the recording, as well as links to any resources that may help you use Copilot better. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Josh. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa. And thanks everyone for joining. For those who don't know me, my name's Josh Gorel. I am the product manager of O365, like Vanessa said. And this is going to be a very engaging session today. So please, please, please don't hesitate. I think if you've been to one of my Tech Tuesdays before, or presentations in general, I try to emphasize asking questions throughout the presentation. I like engagement early because I know myself I'll forget the question by the end of the session. And I normally say that, but this time I truly, truly, truly extra mean it because this is going to be most valuable if you have some thoughts from what you've used Copilot for in the past. Good or bad, if you have any examples, have any questions, what you've liked about using Copilot, what you don't like using Copilot, please, please put it in the chat because I truly mean that in every session, but this one even more so because I think that's where we're going to get the most value. You see on the screen there's a QR code you could scan or go to that link that Vanessa just posted. If you're shy, that link is totally anonymous. I, even as the product manager of Microsoft 365, cannot figure out who is who. So if you want to, bash the product, go for it. But hopefully you don't have to do that. Talking about what we're going to do today, it is kind of an overview of Copilot Lite. So, the recording for the previous session is available. So I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I am going to highlight some similar slides from where Copilot has changed since we talked last about 8 or 9 months ago. So things like what is it? Where is it available and how can I access it? We'll kind of speed through that really quickly to get everybody up to speed on the same page. And then we will really dive into prompting because most of the questions that I've got since our last session was how do I use Copilot? What's the best practices for interacting with Copilot? And then at the end, there'll be some additional resources that actually hid from this presentation so we can focus on the conversation, but will be available in the presentation that we send after the fact. So, without further ado, let's jump in. So, the theme of my conversation here today is going to be prompting, of course. So, prompting, as defined by Microsoft, is best done with these 4 steps, right? There's the goal, there's the context, there's the source, and there's the expectations. So, that's what we're going to keep coming back to throughout this presentation. And yes, this is a Copilot generated image of what a Copilot kid would look like, which before the the recording, we were thinking about how existential that is and kind of strange. But keep these 4 things in mind as we go through the presentation and as you're framing your prompts. You always want to have a goal, you want to have context, you want to have your source, and you want to have your expectations. And we'll talk much more about what each one of those means throughout the presentation, but wanted to just lead with that so you're framing that in your mind as we go through. Here's an example of something that would save you 45 minutes of time, right? So I'm about to sit through a technical 45-minute informative session on a Copilot with commercial data protection. Can you time travel 45 minutes to the future and summarize the presentation in a table with two columns? Copilot Enterprise is, and Copilot Enterprise is not, with a few bullet points in each. I want to use this as a summary slide for people that don't want to listen to me talk for that long in the presentation. Use only information from the presentation itself, no external sources. The table should be concise, clear, and include at least three bullet points in each column. So this is an example of a fairly full, flushed out prompt, right? And you'll see if we line up those with what Microsoft says is best practice for prompt creation, there is each one of these items in here, right? There's the goal, which is I don't want to sit through this and listen to me talk for 45 minutes, and I want it to be a table. The context is, I am going to basically use this as a summary slide for people that don't want to listen to me. Source only from the presentation, no external sources. And then expectations, it needs to be concise, clear, and include at least three bullet points. So we're going to keep coming back to this idea of prompt creation as we go through. I wanted to give an example of one to kind of frame your mind, like I mentioned. But this is a pretty good start to a prompt, right? It's not like your Google searches, few keyword searches, things like that. It is meant to be kind of instructions that you would give a human assistant if you were to give them one. It needs all of these pieces of the puzzle. If you don't include the pieces of the puzzle, it assumes, and we all know what happens when we assume. So the more information you give it, the better. So this is an example of what would be the outcome of that prompt that I just provided, right? So the TLDR of this presentation, if you're just looking for what's changed since Copilot last time, this is the slide that you really need to understand. I broke it up into two columns. I actually created this myself. I didn't make Copilot do it, as funny as the last slide was. So Copilot Enterprise is now saving your history for future use. That's probably one of the biggest changes since last time we spoke. Last time, I kind of stressed that when you create a prompt and you get that information back, make sure you copy it and put it somewhere that is more stable because this will be cleared at the end of its session. Copilot Enterprise is now saving that history for future use, which I think is great because I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally got distracted, went away, and came back and it cleared that history, which is good. It is still subject to that same data classification policy. I am not a security or compliance professional. Please review that and interpret it appropriately. It is accessed in Teams, the M365 app, and a new URL. So that's why I have that underlined there. So Microsoft, kind of across the board, and you'll see more communication about this in the future, is reframing their URL domain structure. So copilot.cloud.microsoft is where you can go to access Copilot. Keep in mind that old URLs that you have will still redirect, but it's best to kind of update those if you have those bookmarked. It is the preferred AI chatbot at WCM. So if you haven't heard anything otherwise from any other IT professional here at WCM, our standard is Copilot Enterprise. So you should be using that for all of your AI chatbot needs, unless you've heard otherwise from one of us for sure. And only as good as the prompt you give it. Remember that goal, context, source, and expectations, and that's going to be the meat of today's presentation. Copilot Enterprise is not M365 Copilot. So I know there was like a Super Bowl ad on this, so it's very much in mainstream. And we are investigating solutions for this currently, but it is not M365 Copilot, meaning you cannot access company data with Copilot yet. That may change in the future, but current state, we do not have that enabled across the board until we kind of can get prepared for that, because there is some implications, of course, when you do that. Copilot Enterprise is not protected unless you see that green shield. So the green shield that we talked about last time is in a different location now, which we'll see in a minute, but the same rules apply. In fact, when they started updates to Copilot Enterprise in the beta, they removed the green shield and everybody in IT lost their mind because we've been telling people look for the green shield for so long. They brought it back. So the green shield is critical. You need to see that. If you don't see that, you are in the not enterprise version of Copilot, the commercial version of Copilot, and you should have no expectation that that is not training the model at that point. It is not a search engine, but can be used to search. So that kind of goes back to prompting, again, the theme of today's presentation. If you just take what you would put in Google and put it in Copilot. You might get your answer you're looking for, an appropriate response, but you really should be reframing your mind from that keyword search methodology to a prompting methodology, and we'll talk about that here shortly. And then finally, it is not Copilot Personal, just to highlight that one more time. Copilot Personal is a product from Microsoft that you can absolutely use in your personal life. It does have more advanced features that are eventually coming to the enterprise product, like voice chat. But Copilot Personal does not have that same green shield. It does not have that same concept of protection. So make sure you do see that green shield when you're interacting with work data. Okay. So I pulled a couple slides from last time and updated them. Some of this may look familiar. We're going to speed through this as fast as we can for people that have already seen this. So what is Copilot? It is a new way to search. You can get answers, not links. I have pretty much been using some version of AI since we last spoke for pretty much all of my searching needs. The biggest change is that conversational language, and it takes a while to kind of overcome that, right? Especially in my generation, we're so used to thinking in how to get Google to give you the answer. But Google really doesn't give you the answer, right? It gives you a series of links that may contain the answer. Um, AI sometimes works for that, right? Sometimes you can literally copy and paste what you would give to Google and get the answer you're looking for, but you don't have those four pillars that really give you the answer you really want, right? Tell it what format you want it, tell it what context, tell it what the goal of this is, and it'll give you much better answers, not just a series of links. So keep these things in mind for just sparking ideas, right? You can get summaries of um, PDFs, big chat posts, websites, videos, etc. You can do analysis on a series of data, numbers, whatever. Tables, it can interpret tables, but then also export out tables. So tables is a great way to not only summarize tables coming into the product, but get tables out if that's the context that you would like. Content, if you want to start drafting things and you're having writer's block, you're staring at that blank screen, it's a great way to do that. I do this almost everything I do that isn't just, a quick chat. I at least have Copilot start it for me. Um, and I also, edit it, right? I put my personal spin on it. I give it my own voice, but just having something to look at to begin, I think is a great starting point. And of course, generating images like Copilot's child we saw earlier. He'll come back in the future too, in the presentation, which is strange, but it's a great way to kind of add some flavor to your presentations, right? Maybe you want a clip art that you just can't find. Use Copilot to generate that image. It is licensed openly, so you can use it for whatever you want because it has been generated just then. So feel free to use that for all of your presentation needs. You can access Copilot in 6 places. Keep in mind the URL changed from last time we spoke, but you can still access it in Edge. You can access it in the URL in every modern browser. You can access it within the Outlook app, which is the new Outlook app. So if you're an Outlook Classic, you won't be able to see it. In New Outlook, you can. You can access it in Teams itself. And of course, there's a mobile application as well. Specifically in the mobile application, be careful that you aren't logging into the personal version. Make sure you go into M365 mobile app because otherwise it is the kind of commercially available Copilot. So keep that in mind for if you aren't using Copilot right now, you can definitely utilize these sources to get started. Okay. So once you get logged in at copilot.cloud.microsoft or any one of those other sources, but I think starting with this URL is the best because it's less pieces of the puzzle to get started with, right? Copilot.cloud.microsoft, you will see sort of this screen. Again, make sure kind of the most important part of the slide is that protected badge, right? It'll be in the upper right next to your new chat button. You'll see that green shield. That is the critical piece of the puzzle you should always start with. If you don't see that, make sure you are signed in with your work account. Once you see that green shield, you have the expectation of this is not training the model any longer, right? Which is the most important part. From there, go nuts, right? Start using some of these suggested prompts. Start creating your own prompts and thinking through how to kind of interact with Copilot. You don't have to be a prompt expert to begin with. Practice makes perfect. So keep going through kind of that process to um, get better and better at your prompt creation. And on the screen too, kind of different from last time, you'll notice that right-hand screen on the screenshot here, your recent chats. So it does store those recent chats for you. You can go back in time and see how you interacted with Copilot to kind of pull information that you might have lost if you're working at the end of the day or you got sidetracked or something like that. You will see that on that right-hand side. Okay. How to chat in 3 steps. So this is a similar slide from last time as well, but I think it kind of helps start that conversation for prompts, right? So number one, prompt. We're going to talk about that a whole lot here in a minute, so I'm not going to harp on that. So step one is enter your prompt. Step two, check your sources. I can't stress this enough. Two and three are probably the biggest questions I've got since that first presentation about 8 or 9 months ago. Um, Copilot is not always right. Google is not always right. Josh is not always right. So um, Copilot is going to give you the answers. Unlike some AIs, it is going to give you where it pulled that information from. If you didn't already give it kind of a framework, right? If you just asked it a question, you can see at the bottom here in that middle section, it's coming from Microsoft.com and Contoso.com. It's going to show you where it's pulling information to give you that answer. Keep in mind that is critical, right? So if you're looking for an answer, you should at least look at those sources to see if you trust those sources. Maybe click on that and go to the web page and do a quick scroll through to see, the conversation. Make sure that the AI is not hallucinating, right? You want to make sure that you trust those sources because the answer it's giving you is only as good as those sources, right? Um, so a question I get a lot is, well, how can I trust Copilot? My response to that is, how can you trust Google? Right? How can you trust an assistant that you ask a question to? It's only as good as the information you give it and the sources that it uses. So it is no different in that regard. Make sure you check the links to make sure that they are reputable and be a little bit diligent, especially if it's a more large, important question you're asking, right? And the third one I think is also very critical from feedback that I got. Unlike Google, where you do a keyword search, and if you don't get what you like, you kind of go back to the search bar and try a different set of keywords, continue the conversation, right? So Copilot understands the history of the chat you're working with. You can literally say things like, that isn't what I'm looking for. Try this, right? And I do that almost every day, right? If you maybe miss a step of those four prompt buildings creation steps, it's going to assume, and it might assume incorrectly. There's no need to kind of throw it away, say this doesn't work. There's no need to start a whole new chat and try again. Just kind of add on to that. Say, actually, I wanted this in a table, or actually, I wanted this in a bulleted form instead of a long list. Things like that. So make sure you're interacting with it more like a conversation than just a series of searches. Okay, so I'll pause there for a minute to see if we have any questions because we're going to kind of dive into what is a prompt. And this will be kind of the meat of today's session. I'm going to try to kind of speed through this a little bit too, so we can get into some conversation at the end. But before we kind of dive deep into prompting, wanted to see if there's any questions we can answer now.
The only question we've gotten so far that Raphael answered, but just in case people aren't monitoring the chat, is can we use it for research and statistical analysis using anonymized coded data? And Raphael responded, as long as there's no PHI or PII, it should be fine. If you want to add anything to that, Josh, feel free.
Yeah, so our policy applies. That's why I linked that policy at the beginning, right? And that policy is the standard, right? If that changes, we'll obviously let you know. I would refer to that policy and reach out to our security or compliance teams to get a confirmed answer on that because we are technical. We didn't make that policy. But I think what Raphael said is appropriate. I think that is kind of the general guidance we give people because that is really what we're trying to avoid. Yes, it is true that Copilot is protected when you see that green shield. That does not mean that our data classification or data protection policies don't apply. So I would check with that.
We did just get another question. Is Copilot deterministic? Will you get the same result with the same prompt?
You will not necessarily, right? So Copilot is generating that answer on the fly. Microsoft does have a huge investment with um, ChatGPT, OpenAI, right? So you should have no expectation that if two people ask the same prompt, you'll get the same answer. You may get the same answer or close to the same answer, but there should be no expectation that you will. In fact, if you ask the same question a little bit later in the day, depending on what sources it uses and how exactly you phrase that question, if it's at all different, you may get a different result, which is why prompting is so important, because how you prompt is definitely going to influence how it's going to respond to you, but it'll likely be different every time.
There's a
Good
question.
question.
There's a question about do we have to do something specific to add Copilot to Teams or Outlook, not seeing the app within these apps?
Yes. So you will see the application in the app, but you do have to pin it. So we can actually take a look at that at the end of the presentation, but that's a good question. So if you go to that URL, best way to follow along if you're doing anything here today, at the end, you will see what that looks like to pin it in the applications that we have.
I'll do one more question and then I'll let you continue with the
Sure.
demo, Josh, and we can grab some more after you're done with the demo. We're limited to 30 responses with Copilot. Could this be increased in the future?
That is a great question. So, 30 responses is true. I believe they are kind of testing an increase on that now because I haven't seen me be limited to that. So I bet that's increasing very soon. We don't have any control over that because it is Microsoft kind of setting there. It's not like we as IT are limiting it to 30. Um, the limit there is just for memory, right? So there's the whole concept in AI of how many bits of information you can give it, right? Um, Keep in mind that limit is kind of a Microsoft limit. So that kind of 30 responses, if you will, is basically remembering all of those responses and formatting the question. My advice there, if you're hitting that limit a lot, is to think through your prompt a little bit more in the beginning because that'll be, one big response. So if you follow the kind of what we're going to be looking at here today, your first prompt may be able to limit a lot of those responses because basically what you're doing there is building the prompt within those 30 responses. And if you just did it at the beginning, you will you will you'll be in much better shape. Good question though. Image creation limited is another one that I see there that I can answer really quick. Limited, sort of. There isn't a theoretical limit of what you can do, although anything that has a likeness to a celebrity or somebody like that or anything that is inappropriate, obviously it will automatically say no. But as far as how many times you can do it, I have not ran into that limit yet. So I think it used to be a certain number of tokens that you had available. I have not seen that yet, so I don't know the exact hard limit on that, but I know that I do it a lot and I haven't hit a limit. So I doubt that you will. Um, I doubt you'll hit that. Great questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to move forward with what is a prompt, but I think most of this presentation was really meant for kind of conversation like that. So keep them coming as I move through, and we'll kind of speed through this prompt section because you will have these slides to refer to as well, and we'll continue the conversation. So what is a prompt? A prompt is obviously what you're giving Copilot, and keep in mind, Copilot has no idea what you want other than what's in that prompt, right? So the assume paradox, I'll call it. You know what happens if you assume, right? That is going to happen with Copilot as well. The key thing, and it is the biggest kind of gear change we have in our mind, especially for, you know, us in our professional lives. We're so used to Googling things. This is not a Google search box, right? I Google totally different than I Copilot. So natural language is great. I literally think like this is my coworker and I'm asking them to do something, right? And they have no idea what I'm doing. So I need to tell them what I am doing so they understand what I want. And the more I tell them, yes, it takes longer to do that, but the more I tell them, the fewer back and forths I need, right? So if my boss, Raphael, tells me, hey, I want to buy a new computer. You should make me a chart of the options that I have. I don't really have a lot of information, right? Does he like Windows or Mac? Or does he not know? Does he code? Does he game? Is he using this for work? Is he using it for personal? I don't know all of these things. I might assume these things and give him way too much information or way wrong information. Copilot is that same exact way. So instead, Raf could ask me, "Hey, I'm looking for a new personal computer. I'm really wanting to get into gaming. Nothing crazy, high end, just some Minecraft and Fortnite. What can I use?" That gives me a lot more context, and the same should go with Copilot. Um, this is a slide that we used last time, except Microsoft went from not effective to less effective, which is kind of funny to me. But less effective, vague, few words, no context, right? So that example I think is really funny. Recap article. What article? How do you want me to recap it? Do you want a bullet points or do you want an executive summary? Do you want a table of everything I found? In what columns do you want in this table, right? That is a not very effective prompt. Kind of extreme example, but not effective. More effective is being specific. I want to recap the findings of the article I copied below, right? Use full sentences because you're really pretending this is your um, assistant, if you will, right? Pretend it's like a person you're chatting with. And you should use the tone and the purpose and the format, right? So, do you want this in a business tone or do you want this to be more jovial? Do you want it to be two or three paragraphs or do you want it to be five bullet points? Give it things like that because then what it will respond is going to be much more aligned with what you expect, and there'll be much less back and forth. So this is at the beginning. I love how they kind of formatted this, right? Because if you put this in your head when you're building your prompts, I think you'll have much better prompts immediately, right? Even if it's not exactly what you want, if you follow this mindset of goal, context, source, and expectations, you will have better prompts immediately. And I think it's a biggest jump from zero to wherever you're going to be with this. You may not be to 0 to 100, but you're going to be well above what you are today. So the goal, what response do you want from Copilot? Context, why do you need it? Who is involved? How do you want it? Source, what should I use or what should I not use? That is important too, right? So if you do not want anything from Reddit or you only want to use Wikipedia, tell it that and it will take that into account. And how should Copilot respond to best meet your expectations? That's things like tone, things like the format of the response. All of that will give you much better prompts. Um, both keep in mind, or also keep in mind, kind of the um, more details on all of these, right? So this is probably my most important slide other than the one at the beginning, right? This is straight from Microsoft. So in the goal section, what response do you want? Keep in mind, like give it a policy, right? And say, hey, what is some loopholes of this policy? Budgeting, action plan based on meeting minutes. All of that is, from Microsoft. And again, keep in mind our policies. But giving it this context of what you're doing and what the goal is definitely going to be helpful. Looping right into the next line here, context. Background information is important, right? You have gone through a process that led you to this question. Give it that kind of summary of those steps that got you here, right? So, who is asking you to do this thing? Tell it like you are an IT professional, you are an HR representative, you are a end user, things like that. Be great to tell the system so it knows how to reply to you. Source. Again, the thing I like to highlight here is, you know, use this website or don't use this website, right? Or only use the information in this PDF, things like that. Um, Limiting the source is most important or is as important as giving it your source, right? So if you don't want it to use non-scholarly articles, right? Say only use sources from scholarly articles. And I think that'll help a lot too. Along with that last one, which is super important too. I never give it a prompt without that last one. Now I sometimes cheat and don't do all of these, and it usually ends up biting me. But that last one, excuse me, that last one I think is the most important, where I want a summary, right? I don't want um, a book. Maybe I do want a book, or do I want an outline with these kind of frameworks? That last one I think you should do in all of your prompting, just so it knows how you want it to respond. So here is a example Copilot prompt that Microsoft gave us here. You can kind of read what that looks like really quick, and kind of in your mind, or you could put it in chat if you want to, take a look at which pieces of the puzzle fit within goal, context, source, and expectations, right? So note this is not a keyword search by any stretch, right? However, taking the time to go through the process of identifying your goal, context, source, and expectations, while it is much longer to do that than a simple keyword search, the hope is at the end of this creation, when you hit enter on this example prompt, you're going to get exactly what you want. You don't get a series of links that you need to go through, read, and understand. The goal of this is to hit enter and everything is presented for you exactly how you want. So take a minute to read that while I get a drink of coffee here and see if you can identify which area each item is. Also take a look at any questions while you're looking. That last question I saw in there, that's an interesting question. So, um, if you are using Copilot for anything worker school related, you should use your worker school account. If you want any of that history after graduation, I would move that to a different location. So if you're using a personal account, keep in mind that that information is not necessarily protected. It can be used to train the model, which is not always good. For personal use, it's fine. For professional use, it is not. So if you're doing anything WCM related, faculty or student, I would use the WCM email account and take any of those prompts you want and move it to another location if you want to retain them. Good question, though. How do we ensure payments get the same response for our competitors? For us comic books. Okay, that's a good question too. So again, I think that all goes into the context and expectations, right? So if you have a template that you guys use, so we have a template, Ithaca has a template, NYP, Columbia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, has a template. Giving it a template for how we work with our communications, I think is helpful. You can even give it a PDF and say, hey, here's an example of something I did. Can we use this to create something with this context and these sources? Um, that is a very good question, though. Ensuring that you're not giving the same response for everybody to make it look like plagiarism. That is a problem people have across the board, even when you're sending emails and stuff. So, kind of like I said in the beginning of the presentation, um, using it as a starting point, but then adding your own spin to it, giving it your own voice, I think is important. Microsoft likes to say Copilot is an assistant, it is not a replacement for a human, which I think is really valuable, right? So you can create your draft and then give it to Copilot for any additional spin. Or you can use Copilot to give you a starting point and add your spin onto it. But it should be a two-way street, right? It shouldn't be just enter all of this, hit enter, and you literally are done. For this use case, you can see, because you're searching for information, that may be the case. But for generating content, you still want to add your own spin on things. So I would say either use a template that we follow that others may not exactly, or create it first and have Copilot aid in that, but don't necessarily rely on it as a 0 to 100 finished product. Okay, so looping back into here, this is a kind of easy example because they followed goal, context, source, and expectations kind of one to one. Keep in mind you do not have to keep it in this order, right? You should have all of these elements in your prompt. This is a good example because it literally followed that one to one. But you could have the source at the beginning if that's what you start with. Actually, I usually do that. I say using this website or using this PDF or whatever. That's what I start with because it just works better in my head to start with that. But you can flip-flop any of these as you want. As long as all of these elements are in your prompt, you'll have a much better time interacting with Copilot. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so we're almost at the end of my presentation. We're going to open it up for kind of back and forth here. So this is an example of something that I used Copilot for recently when I was building this presentation, right? So on the left-hand side here, you'll see this is the Microsoft Education AI Toolkit. This is a really nice kind of PDF. You can see it's 138 pages long though, and I don't have that kind of time in my day. So I kind of started scrolling through this, as you can see in the screen recording, and I went, I don't have time for this because a lot of this is not helpful and it's 138 pages, and I have tickets and people messaging me, and that's just too much time to devote to reading this. However, I noticed on the right-hand side there's overview, AI navigators, plan, implement, and research, and I'd like to kind of see what is in all of these sections because maybe I care about some sections and I don't care about others. So I built a prompt that referenced this PDF, and I said, hey, can you give me a summary of all of this information? And the output was what you see on the right. I use this all the time for stuff like this because I just want to see if any of these sections are important to me, right? I don't want to read a 138-page document where most of it may or may not be applicable. I want to look on this right-hand side and say, okay, here's the overall what it is talking about for each one of these sections that we saw on the left here, or sorry, on the right here, overview, AI navigators, plan, implement, research. I have it summarizing each one with an executive summary, 5 bullet points, and the key takeaway. So now I can take a look at all of these and say, actually, maybe this plan section is really what I was looking for. I can then go to that plan section in the PDF, maybe read the whole thing or some highlights of that, or continue asking Copilot, plan section really looks like what I'm after. Can you give a kind of an expanded summary on that section specifically? This saves me so much time in my day to day, especially with Microsoft release statements, right? There's so many of them that no one human could uh, uh, digest all of that information, right? But with this, I can kind of have a first look of what do I think I'm going to care about, read this, identify the areas that are important, and then use this still as reference, not replacing reading this whole document, but giving you a summary of where in the document I should be looking. So how did I do that, right? You could see I did not necessarily do what I'm saying I should do with the 4 steps, right? I said at the beginning, using paste that URL or that URL of the PDF in there. Can you please summarize each section into 5 bullet points? And it did exactly what I said, right? But then I thought to myself, you know what? I kind of want an executive summary, right? So can you include an executive summary of the entire section at the top? After the bullet points, include key takeaway. So they gave it more of the what I'm looking for here in this second prompt, right? So you could have taken at the top and this section and combined it, would have been closer to what I want. However, when I first chatted with it, I didn't really know what I wanted, which is okay. You can build those 4 steps as you continue the conversation with the AI. Note though that it gave me an executive summary at the top because it assumed that's what I wanted. But in reality, what I wanted is a executive summary section for each subheader, right? Because my goal here, which I didn't fully tell it, was I wanted to know which of these sections is worth reading. So if I continue scrolling through here, I said, can you include an exec summary for each section as well? And it did that. So overview, executive summary, AI navigators, executive summary. And that is exactly what I was looking for. And that is what I used to paste in that presentation. So keep in mind, as you're growing with your prompting, all of that could have been done in one prompt and would have gave me this kind of uh, gold standard of what I wanted, basically. However, it's not wrong to do this, right? Especially because I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't exactly know all of those pieces of the puzzle when I started. But as I saw what it was giving me, you can kind of grow with your prompting, right? Say, actually, I don't care about this so much. I do care about this, and that's what those kind of continued conversations are good for. So if I would have just went up to here and got this. Maybe that is what I'm looking for. In this case, I read it and went, not exactly. I do want kind of more of an executive summary approach. Just continue with the conversation and grow it until you get exactly what you're looking for. That I think is one of the most important things to take away too. That's one of the use cases I use just to kind of start the conversation off. This flow I use multiple times every day. I get an article or I get a PDF online somewhere. I have the AI do a first pass and say, do I care about this? Because I can't tell you how many times I've read something from either Microsoft or a press announcement or whatever, and at the end I'm like, oh, we don't really use that here, so I don't really care. This takes all of that away, and I think this flow is super, super helpful. Here's a bunch of examples of prompts that Microsoft has given us for just kind of to give you some inspiration, if you will. You can use these prompts if you want and kind of see what it gives you. But notice the common denominator of all these, if you want to go through as an exercise after the fact, because I know we're running kind of short on time and I want to give some chance for back and forth. Go through these and take a look at what it uh, how it uses those four pillars, right? Go through and identify the goal, identify the source, etc., and keep an idea of how they are building prompts, and it might help you build better prompts in the future. And that is my presentation. So there is some more slides for reference at the end that will be included, but that is the end of this presentation. I would like some, uh, open discussion here. Please use the chat, or if you're wanting to use this button here to open kind of this form that I have, um, and we will go from there. One thing I did here, just switching back, you guys can see my other screen now, right, Vanessa?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, good. Cool. So if you don't see Copilot in your just normal, um, oh, it's already asking me here. If you don't see Copilot in your normal M365 window, so if you just go to like portal.office.com or office.com, anything like that, you'll notice on the left-hand side, I don't see it. If you click on the waffle menu, or you go to apps here, should take you to mostly the same thing. Take a look at what it has here. One of these items obviously is Copilot. You can right click and pin. And then if you refresh, it'll be on your left-hand navigation there. The first time you go to it, it will ask you, like that pop-up you saw at the beginning, hey, do you want to pin this? Feel free to go ahead and do that if you want. I do see a question about pages, so I did want to talk about that. So let's just go give it an example prompt. Cool. So some of you may remember in the previous conversation that we had a couple of months ago, there was the concept of the notebook or just normal chat. They've kind of combined that into the pages aspect, right? So as you're growing with this Copilot system, you can hover over these options and edit in pages. Edit in pages is great for things. This is actually probably a poor example, but it's great for things like, hey, I have this email draft that I'm working on. Can you take a look? Pages is a way to kind of save that and kind of work with it in a similar way that Notebook was previously, right? So you're giving it something and it'll give you a response, and then you're going to say, actually, can you do this on these bullet points? It's kind of more of a give and take with Copilot rather than just kind of a prompt and an answer. That is something that you'll find use in um, pages. Another thing while we're on that topic is there's also the concept of saving prompts. So one of the things in the slides and the additional resources you'll see is if you come up with a prompt that you like, um, you can use it repetitively, right? So again, this is probably a poor example, but if you got really good information with this, you can go ahead and hit save prompt. It'll give you an automatic title that you can change, and then obviously what the prompt is. Hit save, and it'll be listed here under your prompts, right? If you go then and do that, you can even put like little reminders to yourself. Item, this is totally, I'm making this up. This isn't going to work great, but you'll get the point, right? So you can put little reminders to yourself and save that in your prompt. So if you really liked that prompt, you can save it and then go in and say, actually in this case, I want to learn about dogs, and I want you to do it in 6 bullet points or something like that, right? That's another new feature that I use all the time. If you really like your prompt, save it, and then you can use it in the future. Any other questions or even use cases? If you guys have use cases that you have used Copilot for, I'd like to hear it. If you've run into issues that we can talk about here, I'd love to hear it. Of course, if you are shy, take a look at that form, and we can go kind of offline. If you would like in that form to include your contact information and have me reach back out to you, please do so. It is anonymous, so I won't be able to do that unless you put your information in if you want that. But please do that.
We do have a question. Beth has raised her hand. Beth, if you should be able to come off mic if you'd like to ask
Yes.
a
Can you
question.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So it's not a question, actually. I just wanted to, the way that I've been using Copilot lately, especially actually right even leading up to this call, I've been using it to help me organize presentations. And I will basically say, so and so is giving a talk. It's 10 minutes. It's to this audience. It's for this conference, blah, blah, blah. Here's the kind of breakdown I'm thinking of, what's the supporting research that Weill Cornell Emergency Medicine has done in order to prove these points. And it's been great. It'll structure it for me. I can go back and say, well, this is great, but what if we tried it with leading with, education or that sort of thing. So it's been very useful for that, as well as a lot of times I interview people for content. And I will kind of say, here's what I'm trying to do. I need 500 to 800 word article. The audience is this. Here are the notes I took. I'd like to structure it into 3 sections. And same thing, I use all those steps and it basically comes out with pretty decent articles, which of course is not a replacement, but a tool to, guide me through the next steps and see what I need to change or additional information I need.
Absolutely. You get a Josh Gold star for the day. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, and I think you're using it perfectly. You hit all of the kind of points that I tried to emphasize in this conversation, right? It is not a replacement for a human, but even for this presentation, because this presentation is on YouTube, I actually had it summarize what we did last time for me, so I didn't have to listen to the sound of my own voice, which I hate to do. I took a look at those bullet points and I said, hey, I'm doing a part two to this. What are some items that have changed since this presentation, right? And I obviously had an idea of that because it's my role to know that. But it was great to kind of have bullet points in front of you of how you should format that presentation. I think that's a great use case, exactly what I do too, and that's a great example. Thanks for sharing.
Josh, if you've got a few minutes, I know we're a little over, but I appreciate that a lot of people are staying on because they're interested in learning more about this. Harish,
Sure.
I saw your hand was raised. You should be able to come on the mic if you'd like.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks, Josh. This is really good, a good presentation. I just wanted to check, I mean, the example you shared, is there a way we can collaborate with others as well? Like, for example, if you're doing a contract review and I want to do exactly what you did, which is just highlight a bunch of things from the long contract and then collaborate with other colleagues in terms of giving them those prompts or allowing them to use prompts to provide additional information on those contracts. Is that feasible?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to do that. Pages is one way. Spoiler alert, Pages in the background kind of utilizes a lot of the loop components that we talked about a couple of Tech Tuesdays ago. So if you're not familiar with loop components, I would take a look at that because it's very similar, as you can see here, to loop components. This is actually my test account, so there's nothing in here yet today. So as to not show anything bad on the recording, but this is very much loop. Um, Loop and Pages are kind of the same thing. But once you have a output in Copilot that you do see the button Edit in Pages, that's where it gets stored here in Pages. You can share those pages just like you share loop components, right? However, it is going to be the output that you're sharing ultimately. So my 2 points to your question would be one, if you have a PDF or something that is kind of repetitive, you get a bunch of, the same information in and you want generally the same information out,
Mhm.
you can save your prompt and share that with anybody you want. Say, hey, this is the prompt that I used to get this information. I think this would be good to repurpose in the future. That's like one way to consider it. The other way, if you want to kind of collaborate on the output of that, using Pages/loop would be a great way to do that. After you've had Copilot kind of interact with it, you can paste that uh, output in Pages and/or loop and interact with the output there.
Got it. Thank you.
Great question.
We did have a use case from Andy in the chat who used it to summarize 40 pages of focus group transcripts a couple weeks ago. It sounds like an amazing way to use Copilot, to be honest. Another from Stephen. I've had times where I try and copy, say, 100 text points and summarize in Edge Copilot Oh, but it limits me to summarize into say 65 items.
Yeah, so the context window is something to keep in mind with Copilot. So you'll see 1600 or 16,000 here, sorry. That is a hard limit, right? So if something even in the Edge environment, because that Edge plugin is basically just helping you get to the context you want, right? So if you're interacting with a PDF on the Edge browser versus if you just upload it here, that context window still applies. So, to that, I would say a couple of things. In that context window, it could be a browser like a bandwidth limitation. So, if you just take that article and paste it in here, I've had better luck with the context window. So, instead of opening it in Edge, opening that sidebar and saying summarize this PDF, if you just say summarize this PDF here and paste it in, I've had better luck with that. Because it kind of just pulls the context of that article rather than showing all of the other ads and other things that'll be adding up to that context window limit. Um, Otherwise, I would pull the specific pages from that PDF or that web page that you're looking for. And if you keep running into that limit, I would break it up into different sections in my head, right? So, maybe take the first 25 bullet points, then do the next, then the next. And that's where saving your prompt will come in very handy, right? Because then you can just go in here, repurpose your prompt, and paste in the new applicable information rather than having to do that over and over.
I got an interesting question, Josh. How do you credit and acknowledge the role of AI in your writings?
That is kind of the million-dollar question, right? So everybody is having that kind of concern. Everybody is having that thought, I think, as they get more and more with AI. Kind of a lot of people are kind of noticing that even in social media, a lot of things are just AI generated and bots talking about it. So what purpose does that solve, or what does that give us as a humanity? So that's a very good existential question. I don't have the answer for you. I think that we will be growing with that as we go. My personal thoughts, and this is just Josh's thoughts, so take that for what it's worth. Copilot is a tool. AI is a tool, just like Excel is a tool, right? So if you were to create a pivot table in Excel that gives you a bunch of information and print that out and share it to a bunch of people, you don't necessarily have to put at the bottom generated with Excel pivot tables, right? Because it's a tool you're using to still give your own ideas, but utilizing that tool to get to the answer that you want, right? Same thing goes with Copilot. If you are giving it a prompt, taking the information, copy and pasting it, I think that is, you know, somewhat not great because it doesn't have your spin in it. But, if you're just using it to gather information, summarize things, help you with your flow of your presentation or your document, I think that's just using a tool like any other tool.
We
But
also
that
just
is a
got
great
a
question.
we also just got a comment from Andy Hickner who works, he's one of our librarians.
Mhm.
And he's saying if you're citing it for a peer-reviewed publication, you should cite it as software in whatever reference style you're using, and you could contact the library if you need help with this. I'll be sure in the follow-up email that I send out to put the library's contact information for that specific bullet. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
then I'll do one more question because I know we're running a little late. Again, I appreciate everybody who's interested in staying on. I do understand the reason to use Copilot is because the data is secured and won't be used for training the model. But for personal use, could you please give me a couple of reasons that Copilot is better to use than ChatGPT?
Great question. And my short answer to that is Copilot is ChatGPT. I actually use Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude. I use all of them to kind of compare and contrast differences. Copilot and ChatGPT are the most similar because they are the same framework. So Microsoft gave OpenAI a boatload of money, and they basically took all of their stuff, for lack of a better term, all of their coding and models and everything, and ported it over to its own environment. So in the background, we have our own kind of open AI running in our tenant, if you will. That's an oversimplification, but think of it that way. It is basically better, specifically for work uses, because none of that leaves the tenant, right? So if you were to put something in that you shouldn't in Copilot, that is not as bad as if you were to do that in ChatGPT, right? It's still against policies. There's still ramifications to that. But it does not train the model. So there is much less risk of, almost no risk of data leakage in that regard. So anything work related, that's why we stress Copilot. For personal use, depending on what licensing you have in the personal space, it may be better just because we have the more advanced models in Copilot, right? So looping this in with Michele's question there, which version of ChatGPT is Copilot using? They don't really give that information fully. I do know that they at least use 4.0, which is one of the more modern models, but they basically say that depending on the question, depending on the prompt that you give it, it can utilize different models in the background to provide the best answer. So if you're asking something kind of generic, it can use a lighter weight model to give you that answer quicker. If you're using or if you're asking something much more complex, it can use a much more advanced model that may take a little bit longer to give you the answer, but is better suited for that question. So it can use up to 4.0, but it does not necessarily always use 4.0. You can try to tell it, Michele, which model to use. I haven't had the best luck there. It is basically saying it knows better than us what model to use, and to some degree it's right, and to some degree it's wrong. But it tries to intelligently use the model that is best for that question, that prompt that you give it. So, in summary, for work-related purposes, security and not having to pay for the more advanced models, obviously, are the winning factors for Copilot. That with it is our preferred supported AI system, unless somebody from IT tells you otherwise. Personally, like I said, I use all of them to kind of pick and choose, and I welcome you to do the same thing to stay on top of AI. I still think Copilot is, and ChatGPT, because they're kind of the same thing, um, a much better model in most cases, in my opinion, but that is like saying you like Apple versus Windows.
Thank you, Josh. I think I'm going to start wrapping up this session. We did have a lot of questions, and thank you to the ITS and library folks that are jumping in the chat to also help answer questions about FERPA and other policies and data classifications. Again, that all falls under our data classification policies. I'll be sure in the follow-up email to kind of reiterate what those policies are, the links to them so that you can read them as you'd like and kind of summarize that all together. And I'll include other links about using Copilot, the slides that Josh has provided. And if you have any questions at any point after that, along with the recording, feel free to just reply to the email and I'll make sure it gets to the right people who can answer your questions about using Copilot. But thank you all so much for joining. You've been great, asked a ton of awesome questions. Josh, Raphael, thank you so much for hosting this session today for Tech Tuesday. And we are taking a break for Tech Tuesday next week, but we will be back the week after with another session. So stay tuned for more information about that. Have a great rest of the afternoon, guys.